On February 12, 1945, around 4:47 p.m., in the wooded hills near Epinay, France, 22-year-old American soldier Jack Bigham was lying low on the cold ground. He was a sniper with the 2nd Battalion of the 3rd Infantry Regiment, part of the U.S. Army's 4th Infantry Division. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and damp pine trees. In his hands, Jack held a Springfield M1903 rifle, a standard sniper weapon at the time. But it had a twist. Instead of military scope, he had built his own. He'd put it together using a broken medical microscope, parts from a dismantled German artillery shell, and hand-marked dials. It looked strange. His fellow soldiers joked about it. They called it a toy. Some even warned that it might get him killed. But less than 30 seconds later, those same men watched in disbelief as a German Panzer IV tank, more than 1,200 yards away, exploded in a fireball. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't an airstrike. It was Jack. One shot, one rifle, one homemade scope. And just like that, no one was laughing anymore. This is a true story of Jack Red Bigham, a soldier once ridiculed for his DIY scope, until he used it to change a battle. It's a story about creativity, doubt, and a single shot that made history. Back in the winter of 1944, as the Battle of the Bulge tore through the Ardennes, the 4th Infantry Division was worn out but still pushing forward. By early February 1945, they had reached northeastern France, near the Champagne-Ardenne region. There, in the thick forests and rolling hills near Epinay, the 2nd Battalion of the 3rd Infantry Regiment, known simply as 23, got a tough assignment: test and weaken the German defenses just beyond the Bois d'Ain Ridge. Among the unit was Jack Bigham, a quiet young man from Marshall, Kansas, a small farming town with fewer than 10,000 residents. Before joining the war, Jack had never seen combat. He was a mechanic, a hands-on problem solver. At 19, he had worked as an apprentice in his uncle's watch repair shop. He was so precise with tiny gears and tools that customers used to joke he had ice in his veins. When Jack was drafted in 1943 and sent to Fort Benning, his sharp eye and steady hand stood out. During training, he not only shot well, he understood how to adjust for distance and wind without needing instructions. He used natural markers like trees, fences, and even shadows to estimate range. But back then, there was no official sniper program, and equipment was scarce. So Jack was assigned as a regular rifleman. After the Battle of the Bulge ended in early 1945, the Army began to notice it didn't have enough trained sharpshooters. Many of the scopes, like the Weaver 330C, were damaged, missing, or fogged up. Replacements were hard to get. In Jack's battalion, only 3 scope rifles were available for everyone. Jack saw a chance to fix that. In early February, while stationed near Epinay, he quietly asked for permission to visit the field hospital. At the field hospital, Jack found what he was looking for: a cracked American-made Bosch and Lone microscope that had been damaged in transit. He took the lens tube and turned it into a basic sniper scope. For mounting hardware, he used part of a destroyed German 88mm shell casing, cutting out a steel ring to hold everything together. Over 2 nights, Jack carefully soldered, shaped, and attached the setup to his standard-issue Springfield M1903A4 rifle. When he showed it to the others in his squad, they couldn't stop laughing. One guy joked it looked like something from a science fair. Another called out, "Hey, Bigham, you fixing germs or fighting Germans?" Even the platoon sergeant wasn't impressed. "It's not regulation," he shrugged. "Don't cry when it breaks on your first shot." But Jack didn't back down. He believed in what he'd built. He had tested in the woods west of camp, lining up on tree branches and checking how steady it held. Sure, it had flaws. The view had a slight blue tint. The lens scratched easily. The zero shifted when the weather changed. But it worked. It zoomed in. It stayed lined up. And more importantly, it was the only scope available to him. He wasn't looking for glory, just a way to help. In 1945, new ideas in the Army usually came from the top. Jack was about to show that sometimes real breakthroughs start in the mud, under pressure, from someone who won't settle for good enough. Jack never asked for approval to build his scope. He knew better. Creative fixes weren't encouraged unless they came from higher up. But he did ask, quietly for time. Time at night. Time alone. Time to build something better than what he had, which was nothing. During those cold February nights, Jack worked just past a tree line west of Epernay, under a canvas cover. He wrapped his tools in burlap and oilcloth to keep them quiet. He dimmed his flashlight using red cellophane he'd taken from a medic's signaling kit. He kept careful notes in a small notebook, calculating distances, wind drift, and how changes in temperature affected the scope. Jack broke down the microscope tube into 3 parts: the main lens, the focus ring, and the eyepiece. He mounted it to his rifle using 2 custom-made rings, tightened with bolts he'd salvaged. For the aiming point, the reticle, he used a thin wire pulled from a field telephone cable, fixed in place with dental cement. It wasn't pretty, but it was dead-on accurate. Every night after dark, Jack walked to a spot called Red Hill. It wasn't named for blood, just a reddish, iron-rich soil. There he practiced. He placed old helmets on fence posts at different ranges. First 200 yards, then 400, then 600. Each night, he stepped farther back. He recorded angles, tested how the lens held up in the cold. When the scope fogged up, he solved it by rubbing a light layer of soap inside the glass, then wiping it clean. It worked well enough. Jack kept mostly to himself during these sessions. The others knew where he went. Some watched from afar, curious. Some didn't care. One night, his platoon sergeant warned him bluntly, "You're wasting ammo we don't have." Jack answered calmly, "Sir, I'll bring them back clean." By February 10th, the division's intelligence showed more German armor moving near the Bois de Line, especially Panzer IVs. These tanks have been the backbone of German armored forces for years. The models in the area were the H variant, fitted with 75mm high-velocity guns and up to 80mm of frontal armor. For a foot soldier, being out in the open near a Panzer was deadly. The usual answers were airstrikes, anti-tank guns, or bazookas at close range. A rifle, even a sniper rifle, normally couldn't stop one. Jack had a different idea. He'd studied Panzer for diagrams and knew the layout well. The engine deck at the rear had fuel caps and often carried spare fuel cans, exposed and reachable when crews refueled quickly. If he aimed for those soft spots instead of the hull or turret, a well-placed shot could ignite fuel, force the crew to abandon ship, and create chaos. It might not destroy the tank outright, but it could stop it. The plan was careful, not wild. Nobody believed it yet. By February 11th, the 2nd Battalion of the 3rd Infantry Regiment had pushed the edge of the Bois de Line, a patch of woods over a shallow valley by the Mon River. The 4th Infantry Division's orders were to push through German lines, weaken resistance, and secure high ground for the spring offensive into Germany. Scouts reported heavy armor traffic on a narrow, muddy road that ran to the tree line, a route perfect for moving tanks out of sight. Intelligence confirmed at least 3 Panzer IVs dug along the western edge of the forest, rotating crews every 6 hours. The Germans were ready to fight. During a command briefing that morning, Lieutenant Colonel Harris made an unusual request. He wanted a sharpshooter in position by daybreak the next day, someone quiet, steady, and familiar with the terrain. The job was simple to describe and dangerous to do. Observe, disrupt vehicle movement if possible, avoid engaging enemy infantry, and create delays by picking off officers or otherwise forcing confusion. One name came up, Bigham. Jack was called into the command tent. Harris eyed him like a man checking a tool he wasn't sure about. "I hear you've been experimenting with a rifle," he said. "You think that thing can reach past 400 yards?" Jack answered with quiet confidence that it could. Harris didn't smile. He handed Jack a map and circled Grid 17 Alpha, an elevated stand of pines about 1,200 yards from the suspected tank positions. It offered a long, clear line of sight, far beyond standard doctrine. "You go in before dawn," Harris said. "No backup, no noise, no second chances." Jack said yes. That night he packed light, his Springfield with a homemade scope, 40 rounds of match-grade ammo selected for uniformity, a pair of wire cutters, 2 canteens, and a single chocolate bar. No sidearm. He didn't expect to fight his way out. After dark, he moved alone across a frost-covered field toward Grid 17 Alpha. Shortly after midnight, he reached the ridge and dug a shallow scrape beneath a fallen pine, settling in to wait. Above Jack, the moon pushed through thin clouds, casting long, pale shadows across the treetops. The forest was dead quiet. No bugs, no wind, just the distant rumble of artillery and the occasional burst of machine gun fire far off to the east. Jack checked his scope again. He marked wind changes by carving tiny notches into a branch above his hide. He measured distances using fence posts and the width of the valley. He tightened the scope's mount one last time. Everything was steady and locked in. Then he waited, lying perfectly still, stretched out flat, for nearly 6 hours. Just before sunrise, a thin column of smoke rose on the far side of the valley. A Panzer was moving, slow and deliberate. It rolled out from the trees and stopped just beyond the ridge. Steam curled from the exhaust. A soldier, likely the loader, stepped out without a helmet and began refueling from a jerrycan strapped to the tank's rear. This was the moment Jack had been waiting for. One exposed fuel can. One mistake. One shot. He exhaled. The target was tiny, about the size of a lunchbox. He'd have less than 3 seconds to hit it. It was 1,200 yards away. Jack held the crosshair steady. His finger moved to the trigger. The forest held its breath. It was a shot no one expected. 1,200 yards, nearly 3/4 a mile, across a foggy French valley at first light. No spotter, no backup, no margin for error. Just one man, one rifle, one custom-made scope. Jack's body stayed calm, but his mind was sharp and moving fast. He saw the Panzer clearly now in the morning light, a mud-covered German Mark IV, the H variant. Its main gun was angled slightly down as it idled. 2 crew members worked quickly at the back, thinking they were safe. The nearest American line was more than a kilometer away. No one was supposed to shoot from that far. But Jack wasn't aiming for the tank's heavy armor. He wasn't trying to penetrate the hull or turret. He knew that would be pointless. That front plate was 80 millimeters thick. A .30 caliber round for Springfield wouldn't even dent it. He was targeting something softer, the exposed fuel can possibly leaking, maybe with a loose cap. Under pressure, German crews often rush refueling. Spilled gas near the intake could ignite, and if that fire reached the ammo stored near the engine, the whole thing could go up. Jack lined up the reticle, the single wire he'd hand-strung and set with dental cement. The breeze had calmed, just a slight wind from the west, maybe 3 miles per hour. He adjusted for drift. At that range, being off by even a 1/4 inch at the muzzle could mean missing by several feet. He took one deep breath, held it, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked gently against his shoulder. The shot cracked across the valley. Then silence. For a second, nothing happened. Then everything did. A burst of sparks. A sudden flash. Then a fireball. The jerrycan ignited first, splashing burning fuel onto the crew. One screamed. The other ran. Flames raced up the back of the tank, caught on the engine grate, and spread fast. Then came the blast. A deep, thunderous roar. The ammo inside the Panzer exploded, blasting out the rear. Fire shot into the sky. Jack stayed frozen, fingers still on the trigger for a moment longer. Then he eased off. Smoke poured into the cold morning air. Across the valley, German soldiers scattered in confusion, unsure what had just hit them. Some soldiers pointed toward the blast. Others dove for cover. No one could tell where the shot had come from. It was too far and too exact. Back on the American side, men from the 23rd watched in stunned silence. They heard the single crack of the rifle, then saw the fire and the explosion. At first, nobody spoke. Finally, a corporal muttered, "No way. That wasn't Bigham, was it?" Another answered, "He's the only one out there." Hours later, Jack crawled back through the tree line. His hands were raw from the cold, and his face was streaked with dirt. He looked spent. When he reached the forward post, there were no jokes, no teasing. The men looked at the rifle, the makeshift scope, and then at him, quietly impressed. Jack had just made a shot everyone thought impossible, using gear they hadn't trusted. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The tone around him had changed. The nicknames dropped away. People treated him with a new, respectful quiet. Word moved fast. Within hours, Lieutenant Colonel Harris got a message from battalion headquarters. German radio intercepts reported a suspected American sniper attack on an armored unit. The Panzer that blew up had been part of a mobile counterattack meant to stop the 4th Infantry's advance. Jack's shot had stopped that push and set off a chain reaction. German crews began changing how they handled fuel and refueling. Canisters were kept farther from the rear deck. Refueling was done undercover when possible. Hatches stayed closed unless absolutely needed. Those were practical changes driven by concern, not rumor. The next morning, the battalion command called Jack in for a debrief. Officers wanted details, his process, his calculations, his scope. He brought the handmade optic, still marked with residue and frost. He explained how he'd used a broken Bosch and low microscope, how he'd calibrated the sight with trial shots and careful marks, and how he'd made the reticle from a single wire strand taken from a communications cable. People took notes for the first time. Lieutenant Colonel Harris asked plainly, "Can you teach this?" Jack answered, "Yes, sir." Over the following week, he was temporarily assigned to division training to show his methods to selected riflemen. His lessons were direct and useful. Improvise carefully, measure everything. Trust your instincts, but check them with data. One of the same sergeants who had laughed earlier asked to look through the scope. He examined it, handed it back, and said, "It's rough, but it works." News spread beyond the unit. Another battalion asked for a demonstration. A division major arrived asking for a written summary. People couldn't go over the fact that a field-made scope, assembled from scrap parts and hard work, had achieved what standard gear hadn't in that area. The tank hadn't been destroyed by sheer force. It was stopped by someone who outsmarted it. Jack never bragged about it. That just wasn't who he was. He stayed the same, quiet and focused. In the evenings, he'd check the scope, clean the bolt, and run his fingers along the cold barrel like a mechanic, making sure an engine still ran smooth. Jack knew exactly what he was chasing. Not attention, not praise. Just dependability. He wanted his gear to work. The rifle, the scope, and the shot had become one story. His story. And even though he never asked for credit, the Army had started paying close attention. In a war filled with machines, mass-produced weapons, and factory-made tools, Jack Bigham had reminded everyone of something older and deeper. The most powerful weapon isn't always what you're issued. Sometimes it's what you build yourself. The war would end, but the legacy wouldn't. 3 months later, in May 1945, Nazi Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over. The guns fell silent. Cities were wrecked. The countryside, from Normandy to the Ardennes, was left scarred, full of rusting vehicles and memories buried in the dirt. For most soldiers, including Jack, there was no send-off or big moment. Just new orders. Pack up, go home, move on. He returned to Kansas that summer. His hometown of Marshall greeted him quietly. At home. His parents had left his old workshop untouched. Same tools, same cluttered table. Even the same pencil notes. One of them read, 3 seconds drift at 500 yards. Jack didn't talk much about the war. When people asked, he'd just smile and say, "I did my part." That was all. But he brought the rifle home. His Springfield 1903 A4 and the homemade scope, still scratched, still patched with glue and wire, stayed locked in a cabinet for years. In the 1950s, Jack was invited to speak at a local veterans event. He brought the rifle and scope, not to show off, but to show what someone could do with the right focus and drive. He told the full story, not just the shot, but the setbacks, the doubts, the work. He ended with a line that would later be engraved on a plaque at the Regional War Museum. It was never about the scope. It was about believing I could make something better, even when no one else believed it with me. The Army never officially used Jack's design, but his story spread anyway, part of the quiet legacy passed between soldiers. During the Korean War, even Vietnam, instructors sometimes share the tale of the Kansas farm kid who built his own scope and stopped a tank. The details change over time, as stories do, but the message stayed solid. Thinking differently matters. In the late 1970s, a military historian researching homemade weapons from World War II tracked Jack down. They talked for hours. Jack showed him the scope, now kept in a padded flannel-lined case. The historian wrote about it in a small book called Tools of Last Resort. Ingenuity in Combat. That same year, Jack donated the rifle and scope to the Kansas Military History Center. They're still there, sealed in a glass case beneath a faded photo of a young man with a strong jaw, clear eyes, and grease on his hands. Most people walk past without noticing, but a few stop. They lean in, read the label, look closely at the dents and scratches. And in that moment, they understand. This wasn't a tale of medals or big parades. It was about a quiet mechanic who refused to accept the word impossible. Jack Bigham never chased a legacy, but he left one anyway. He didn't see himself as a strategist. He wasn't a colonel drawing plans. He was a corporal in the field, a hands-on soldier who thought differently about tools. Sometimes history moves not because of plans, but because someone on the ground changes how things are done. After the Panzer incident, Jack's story moved to the 4th Infantry Division and into after-action reports. It never became formal doctrine at once, but its effects were clear. First, the Army realized it had underestimated field innovation. Jack used broken parts, a damaged microscope, scrap metal, and wire to build something that worked under fire, that showed the value of practical ingenuity. Second, he exposed a tactical blind spot. Sniper training back then focused on infantry targets, officers, gun crews, observers. Few people had considered that a sniper could affect armored vehicles by targeting vulnerable support points. Jack proved that a well-placed shot at the right spot could stop a tank's movement and force the crew to react. After-action reviews started recommending wider sniper training, including how to spot and exploit soft or exposed points on enemy vehicles. A short clause appeared in a late 1940s field manual advising personnel to recognize and use exposed support elements on mechanized units when possible. It didn't name Jack, but the change grew from his shot. Third, his success pushed a rethink of sniper doctrine. During World War II, the U.S. lagged behind the Soviets and Germans in sniper development and optics. Jack's improvised scope, though crude, raised a bigger question. What if soldiers at the front were encouraged to solve problems, instead of only waiting for orders from above? In the 1950s, the Army invested more in optics and formal sniper programs. By the Vietnam era, snipers were treated as a real tactical asset. Rifles improved, scopes got better, and training became more consistent. Jack didn't build all that himself, but his action highlighted an important idea. Battlefield practices must adapt to real conditions. Those lessons stuck. Modern military training still teaches how to find vulnerability points on vehicles, how to think under pressure, and when to improvise if supplies fail. These are practical skills, learned from real events, not from theory alone. In the end, Jack's shot proved a simple truth. Precision isn't always about the tool you're given. Sometimes it's about how you use it. Sometimes it's not about the tool. It's about the will behind it. In every war, there are names etched in stone, generals, battles, dates. But real history is often shaped in quieter moments, not by headlines, not by parades, but by a single decision, a handmade solution, one act of quiet defiance no one saw coming. Jack Bigham never raised his voice. He didn't write a book. He didn't call himself a hero. He didn't set out to change the Army. He just saw a problem, built his own answer, and stuck with it, even when no one believed he could. His story, one man, one rifle, one improvised scope, challenges the way we think about courage, skill, and innovation under pressure. Jack's moment didn't come in a blaze of glory. It came in calm, steady control, in the belief that he could see what others couldn't, and hit what others said was impossible. Most of us are told to follow the manual, wait for approval, stay in line. But the biggest leaps in science, in war, in anything, come from someone who says, "This isn't good enough, I can do better." Jack's homemade scope wasn't just a technical fix. It was a message that ideas matter, even if they look odd at first. That persistence gets mocked until it works. And that the only difference between failure and breakthrough is someone willing to try anyway. Picture the battlefield Jack was on. Cold mud, steel machines, real fear, a world where blending can keep you alive. But even in that world, with nothing more than a cracked microscope and a steel ring from enemy shrapnel, he changed the course of a fight, not by following orders, but by thinking beyond them. We live in a world now filled with high-tech tools, precision systems, and digital everything. But Jack Bigham's mindset is more relevant than ever, because some problems still can't be solved with standard-issue thinking. Some problems need someone willing to say, "I'll build it myself. I'll figure it out." Maybe that's you. Maybe someone's told you your idea won't work, that it looks wrong, that it's not worth the effort, that no one does it that way. And maybe that's exactly why you should keep going. Jack's story reminds us, innovation isn't a department, it's a mindset. And sometimes, the smallest change in the hands of someone who refuses to give up can ripple farther than anyone expects. One man, one lens, one shot, and a moment that still matters, nearly 80 years later. Now it's your turn. What part of Jack Bigham's story stuck with you? Was it the doubt he faced? The silence after the shot? The impact no one saw coming? Or maybe it's this question: what would you build if you stopped waiting for permission? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters. Your story might be the next one someone needs to hear. And if Jack's story moved you, share it. Because right now, someone out there is holding their own version of that homemade scope, wondering if it's enough. Maybe your belief is the shot they've been waiting for. In the quiet hours of French woodland, a young infantryman named Jack Bigham lay motionless beneath a fallen pine, his rifle steady, his breath controlled. The war around him roared with artillery and armor, yet in that rare moment of stillness, he did something few believed possible. With a homemade scope strapped to the barrel of his rifle, he made a shot that changed how people looked at what's possible in battle, and by extension in life. Jack's story begins in a small town in Kansas, where he learned to tinker with watches and gears rather than weapons. He was drafted into a war that demanded machines, mass production, and standard-issue everything. And yet, he carried within him the traits of a mechanic and a thinker: patience, precision, curiosity. He didn't go looking for headline fame. He simply refused to accept the limitations that came with standard issue and said to himself, "I can build better. I can fix what's broken. I can try." So he scavenged a broken microscope. He used a steel ring from a shell casing. He soldered, he filed, he adjusted night after night under a canvas just beyond the tree line. He lined those tiny components with a rifle and made it work. Others laughed at him. They called him a toy maker. They called him delusional. They said he was going to get himself killed. But Jack ignored that. He believed that innovation doesn't always come from the top. Sometimes it comes from someone in the trenches, someone bending metal in the cold. Then came that dawn. One shot. More than 1,200 yards. A tank. Fuel canister exposed. Crew refueling. Fire. Explosion. Chaos. Silence afterwards. Awe. Recognition. Not with medals, banners, or parades, but with respect and the quiet. The mocking stopped. The rifle, the scope, and Jack became one story. Not because he shouted it, but because he lived it. Jack didn't have a custom sniper rifle. He didn't have first-tier optics. What he did have was curiosity, a mechanical mind, and the will to build something. The broken microscope was in the trash. The shell casing ring was enemy scrap. And he turned both into purpose. That's a key part of his legacy, resourcefulness. When you're handed what seems insufficient, the question isn't always, why can't I, but what can I make with what I have? In life, we pick up limits. We hear this is standard, this is regulation. We don't do it that way. But the story of Jack argues that sometimes the bigger question is, what if I reinterpret that? What if I accept that the manual is just a starting point? Because the manual is written for most cases, rarely for the edge cases, the 1 in a million shot, the heated night under canvas where someone stays awake and solves his own problem. Jack's moment didn't happen in a workshop back home. It happened in war, when the temperature dropped, when supply lines were stretched, when equipment failed, when the army was short of scope rifles. He didn't get to wait for a factory fix. He had to act now. And action under pressure distills what's essential, Clarity of goal, reduction of excess, movement of will. Innovation in comfortable settings is easier, but it's less real. Real innovation often happens because there is no choice. Jack faced a real need. He accepted the danger. He accepted the risks. And in that environment, the improbable shot became possible. Standard sniper doctrine didn't consider how riflemen could affect armor. They aimed at infantry, machine gun nests, forward observers. Tanks? Armor? That was a realm of anti-tank guns, airstrikes, artillery. But Jack looked at the map, he studied diagrams, and he asked, what if the vulnerability is not the front plate, but something else? What if the issue is the fuel deck, the refueling process, the external jerrycan strapped to the back? He found a fault line in the fortress. The lesson here, vulnerability is often hidden behind the visible. If everyone is trained to attack the front door, what about the side door, the back door, the overlooked point? Jack found it because he looked deeper. In your work, your life, your projects, identify what others assume cannot be changed. The armor that seems impenetrable might simply be the focus everyone tries to hit, but find the unexpected angle. That's where real leverage lies. Jack didn't scream. He didn't ask for praise. He didn't demand recognition. He packed his gear, he practiced, he tested, and he shot. Afterwards, he returned quietly. The mocking stopped. The change began. He didn't need to build a monument. His monument was the change. Respect didn't come from loud speeches. It came from trust earned. That is a critical point. Transformation often happens not through loud leadership, but through demonstrated capability. In the context of leadership or innovation today, think about this. How many people are labeled innovators because they talk loud? But how many quietly build, test, iterate, and deliver when it matters? Jack's story reminds us that credibility is built through doing and through the integrity of one's methods. While Jack's shot itself was singular, the changes that rose from it were broad. The Army changed how they trained snipers and thought about support roles. The manual added clauses. Doctrines shifted. The next wars, Korea, Vietnam, looked different thanks in part to his action. That's the ripple effect. It's tempting to assume only big systems cause big change. But sometimes a single decision, executed well in a moment of need, moves the needle. The student who builds a tool others rejected. The engineer who challenges standard practice and shows a simpler way. The team that finds a workaround when the official solution fails. Those small pushes become waves. We live in an age where precision is engineered, where tools are factory-made, where sensors, software, and automation dominate. Yet, Jack's story remains relevant because it shows that no matter how sophisticated tools get, the human mindset behind them matters. When equipment fails, supply lines break, conditions degrade, what matters is adaptability. In many fields today, business, science, social change, we regularly face standard issue thinking. The tools we're given. The process we're told to follow. The software someone else built. But what if you asked instead, what if I build something better? What if I adapt it for this context? That's where Jack's spirit lives on. You might not be in a battlefield, but you're in your field, your craft, your moment. Maybe you've heard, we don't do it that way, or just use the standard tool. Maybe you're staring at equipment, process, or a system you're told to live with. But what if you asked, what if it's not about what they issue, but what I build? You might not have a broken microscope, but you might have overlooked parts, unused resources, a problem everyone says is impossible. Jack's story asks you to reflect. Are you using what you've been given, or are you building what you need? Are you waiting for permission, or will you test quietly and act? Are you looking at the front of the tank, or the support canister behind it? Are you willing to be mocked, to face doubt, to try anyway? Jack never got a parade. He didn't write a memoir with bold claims. His legacy appears in small print, in training manuals, in anecdotes told to new recruits decades later. That's worth something, because real legacy is less about headlines and more about the change in how things are done. When you visit the Kansas Military History Center and see his rifle and scope, you won't just see metal and glass. You'll see a memory of what one person did when the tools were weak and the odds were long. you'll see that innovation needn't come from a chamber full of generals or a factory full of engineers. It can come from someone with a vision and the hands to make it real. So this story ends and begins. It ends with Jack's shot in the cold French dawn, but it begins with you. What will you do with the moment you're given? What tools lie around in your hands, waiting for purpose? Where in your field is a jerry can waiting to ignite? Where is the tank of conventional thinking that needs a fresh angle? Maybe you've been told your idea is silly. Maybe you've been told you're only a mechanic or a junior employee or a small voice on the edge of the team. But sometimes that's exactly who sees the unseen. That's exactly who wrenches the broken parts and builds a new tool. This is your chance to experiment, to measure, to try when no one is looking, to refine when no one applauds, to aim where others said you won't hit, to build a legacy not because you sought it, but because you earned it. Remember, in a world of factory precision and digital perfection, there's still room, maybe more than ever, for the handmade, the improvised, the daringly simple. The rifle didn't have to be the newest model. The scope didn't have to be the high-end version. The man didn't have to be the highest rank. He only had to believe and act. So ask yourself, if you weren't waiting for permission, what would you try? What would you build? What would you throw yourself at when everyone else said the tool wasn't up to it? Because the answer isn't always in the manual. Sometimes it's in the moments between the pages, in the midnight drilling, in the quiet counting of wind drift, in the decision to pull the trigger when all you have is belief. Jack Bigham's story is not a proclamation of heroism. It's a gentle but powerful reminder. Doing what you're issued is safe. Building what you believe in is bold, and bold matters. His shot echoed through history not because it was loud, but because it was precise. Not because it destroyed everything, but because it changed how people thought. One man, one lens, one bullet. And 80 years later, that still matters. Let your moment matter too. Because the ripple you make might not be in headlines. It might be in the tools someone else builds next, the mindset they carry, the belief you ignite. The rifle sits in the glass case now. The scope scratched and patched, a photo beside it, a caption, a quiet testament. And still, someone stops, reads it, leans in and understands. What will they see in your story? What shot will you take? What legacy will you quietly leave? The end of this tale is the start of yours. Maybe that's the real power of stories like Jack's. They don't just live in the past. They echo into the future. They settle into the hands of the next person holding a broken tool, staring down a problem no one else wants to fix, wondering if what they're building will ever be enough. Because let's be honest, most of us won't get the perfect setup. We won't always get clear instructions, the latest gear, or the approval we think we need. What we get is what Jack got: limited tools, tight deadlines, harsh conditions, and doubt. The doubt of others. The doubt inside ourselves. The voice that says, that'll never work. Or, you're wasting your time. Or, no one else does it like this. But Jack's life proves something powerful. You don't have to silence that voice. You just have to keep working through it. When people laughed at his scope, he didn't argue. He kept tuning it. When they said he was wasting time, he kept refining his aim. When they warned him not to rely on something untested, he didn't push back. He proved them wrong through action. That's a rare kind of strength. Quiet strength. The kind that doesn't shout, but changes everything anyway. It's easy to think stories of grit and invention are behind us, that everything worth doing has already been done. But the truth is, every generation has its panzers, complex problems wrapped in armor. Every generation has its ridgelines and red hills. And every generation needs someone willing to take a longer shot than what the manual says is possible. Maybe that's you. Maybe the solution you've been building in your garage, your lab, your kitchen, your classroom is the one someone will tell stories about someday. Maybe it won't be flashy. Maybe it won't make headlines. But maybe it will make a difference. A real one. Because history doesn't remember the people who waited for permission. It remembers the ones who tried, who acted despite the odds, despite the pushback, despite the laughter. The ones who didn't set out to make history, just to do what needed to be done a little better. That's what Jack did. That's what you can do too. So when you're facing something that feels too big, too armored, too far out of reach, think about Jack Bigham. Think about a cold forest, a broken scope, and a single shot that shouldn't have worked, but did. Then ask yourself, what am I waiting for? And what might happen if I stop waiting and just build it? Because the shot you take, no matter how small, might echo farther than you'll ever know.